ThoughtCot is a discussion framework which guarantees unanimous outcomes over contentious matters without using votes or moderators. With the ability to achieve undisputed resolutions, it becomes possible for people to place wagers against ideas using utility tokens on the blockchain, either as passive observers or as contributors to the debates. Before describing how the software works, it's important to explain the philosophical foundation that it rests upon. It's a miracle of modern thought which has remained hidden within humanity's blind spot throughout the ages as a consequence of righteousness. ThoughtCot, as the world's first contradiction provider, will assemble a timeless and ever-evolving bill of wrongs, thereby helping people discover mistakeless things which can be said within the eyes of the collective. Beliefs, assertions, questions, and answers represent constructive dialogue, all of which exhibit single polarity. This is the default form of communication in everyday speech. Contradictions are destructive in nature, and the inversion process requires the use of dual polarity, often represented here in the form of can't because. Disagreements are settled through an exchange of contradictions and what can be called a game of attrition. The last word wins because entries of every kind, including contradictions, are always considered to be true by default. Any contentious matter requires a bias to break the deadlock. In today's world, this bias comes from personal inclinations in the form of authority or voter opinions. The only fair way to overcome impasses programmatically is by permanently favoring the truth, the way that nature intended. When a child comes into this world, they are bound to believe everything they're first told. Truth by default is innate, despite people growing up in a broken world that fosters suspicion. The open source movement has given humanity the power to change course. However, that's a topic best left for ThoughtCot once it becomes operational. It doesn't matter what words are used, the framework gives every new submission the benefit of the doubt. This represents the purest form of logic because no exceptions are required and therefore no weaknesses can be exposed. Russell's teapot is a famous philosophical thought experiment which suggests that evidence is necessary to support the truth. However, that methodology invites hypocrisy, as the evidence is itself considered true by default. If everything required evidence to support the truth, it would be impossible to ever reach the bottom. ThoughtCot software does not analyze or judge content whatsoever. That's a job for humans. The framework simply keeps arguments from deviating with circular arguments, red herrings, and ad hominem attacks. By forcing users to focus on mistake avoidance when disagreements arise, it eventually pins one side into a corner from which they can't escape. In other words, the objective is to make the other side submit in the interest of time and reputation. Offering a ridiculous and therefore easily contradictable statement does not invite the formation of alliances, which leaves it vulnerable to becoming overpowered. Let's see some common pitfalls that happen without a formal contradiction process. Most people have felt the frustration of receiving a can't without a sensible because. The mind has no choice but to infer.
I'm a big boy now, and I can cross the street myself.
Sorry, but you can't cross the street alone.
Why not?
Because I said so. Why don't the kids call?
Perhaps we made some mistakes, or we are them. Here's a typical example of what might happen in a non-structured debate, such as a typical blog. Deviation occurs when a because is provided without a can't. The latter provides binding.
The world is round, which makes it possible to travel west and return to your starting point.
You can't say that the world is round because if I hold the straight edge up to the horizon, the two are perfectly aligned.
You can say that the world must be flat, even if the horizon appears that way, because if a bug were to stand on an extremely large ball, there would be no curvature evident from its perspective.
I have no reason to waste my time talking to someone who lacks a scientific degree. Every sailor knows that ships don't come back after venturing far out to sea because they fall off the edge.
Let's try the first example again, this time by enforcing the use of can't because in order to expose valid reasoning with bindings. Since people learn by mistakes, it makes sense to teach by them as well.
I'm a big boy now and can cross the street myself.
You can't cross the street alone because you might get hit by a car.
You can't say I'll get hit by a car if I cross the street because I listen carefully before I begin walking.
You can't say it's safe to cross the street if everything's quiet because electric cars can't be heard until it's too late. You can't cross the street alone because you might get hit.
You can't say I'll get hit if I cross the street because I'll use both ways to ensure the road is empty before proceeding.
You can't say that looking both ways will prevent you from getting hit when you cross the street because a meteor could fall from the sky, killing you from above.
You can't say that a falling meteor increases the danger for me to cross the street because I wouldn't have the same chances of getting hit if I stayed put.
The same contradiction process is unknowingly used today, evident wherever unanimity is achieved by a large collective. Putting a man on the moon is one of the most complicated objectives undertaken. Votes or authority aren't used to arbitrate the push of a launch button. If a single person raises a concern, it must be contradicted before proceeding. People start out believing that the mission will succeed, observing truth by default, before a long process of mistake avoidance ensues. However, the very same people achieving unanimity for such an intelligent endeavor cannot come to terms on political issues. Humanity's blind spot is partly to blame. Rights, laws, rules, and whatever else gives someone permission to commit any mistake which stands in their way. More importantly, the way in which we choose to coordinate our beliefs is what determines whether or not we flounder under competition or excel with collaboration.